So the third empire is belly and thighs of bronze, the Grecian Empire. The Grecian Empire, headed by Alexander the Great, would conquer the Persian Empire, and sure enough it did. And guess what? The Grecian Empire will also come back and be significant in the end times, mostly in the section of the Grecian Empire, the Macedonian part, which is in Turkey and Syria, which we'll get to in a minute. I'm going to talk for a moment about something that I think is really important. That verse up there, let me read it if I can, please. Daniel 7:6. After this there was a leopard, which had 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads. The Grecian Empire conquered the Persian Empire, which conquered the Babylonian Empire. And the Grecian Empire, according to Daniel 7, has 4 wings and 4 heads. The wings and the leopard part probably emulating the speed of which Alexander the Great conquered the entire world. He didn't conquer the entire world, but he conquered a section of the Middle East, all the way over to India, which, by the way, is very important. I just said that Alexander the Great conquered the Grecian Empire all the way to India. The Roman Empire didn't get anywhere near India. And according to the book of Daniel chapter 2, whatever the end-time empire is, it had to conquer that land all the way over to India in order to match the description in Daniel 2. Roman Empire doesn't match that. But it also depicts those 4 heads because those were the 4 generals that replaced Alexander after his untimely death. And instead of paying attention to Alexander the Great, the prophet Daniel shifts his attention in a different direction. You have to pick this up reading the book of Daniel. This is often missed, but very relevant. The prophecy of Daniel doesn't follow Alexander the Great's accomplishments. Instead, he's concerned with the 4 post-Alexander generals who come after Alexander. The Grecian Empire divided into 4 empires. Cassandra and Antiochus took Europe. Ptolemy took Egypt, which is very important, and Seleucus took the Middle East and became known as the King of the North, according to Daniel chapter 11. Now, I know some of this is going to be difficult, but you need to hang on because in about 3 minutes, what you're going to say is, now, how did we get to that point again? So hang in there with me. Daniel wasn't concerned with Alexander's accomplishments, and Daniel's not even concerned with Cassander and Antiochus. You can see that Lysimachus and Cassander was over in Europe. You can see from the map up on the screen. Ptolemy was down in Egypt, and Seleucus was the king of the north who was over the Middle East and Syria and in what would be modern-day Turkey. But Daniel's not even concerned with the 2 empires in Europe, and that always interests me. That when given an opportunity for the Word of God and prophecy to shift towards Europe, it never does. It pivots and it comes back to the Middle East every time. Daniel's whole prophecy could have gone to the west and could have followed those 2 generals, but it doesn't. It goes to the east and then into the Middle East, and it follows those 2. In Daniel chapter 11, Daniel begins to launch a detailed prophecy, the longest prophecy in the Bible, about those 2 generals, the Ptolemies in Egypt and Seleucus and the king of the north. But Daniel stops following the Ptolemies. And sooner or later, you're studying Daniel, you're reading Daniel. He no longer follows Alexander the Great. He no longer follows 3 of the generals. Daniel's got his mind and his focus on this guy by the name of Seleucus. And as Daniel in his prophecy is watching Seleucus, he sees what he calls a little horn, the king of Syria, the forerunner of Antichrist. We're talking now about the Middle East roots of the coming empire. And when he sees this Antiochus the Epiphanes IV, the king of Syria in 170 BC, he begins to describe what he does. And he notices he captures Israel's temple, just like Antichrist will. He goes in and he commits the abomination of desolation. He kills a pig and he sprinkles the blood all over the altar. Commits the abomination of desolation. He then proceeds to slaughter Jews, tens of thousands of Jews. Antiochus the Epiphany almost eradicated the Jews. Finally, the righteous family of the Maccabees, Judas Maccabees, lifted up a revolt, a great revolt, and overthrew the Seleucid Empire off of Israel and reclaimed their temple and cleansed their temple. It's called Hanukkah. Today, when they have Hanukkah, it's a celebration of the cleansing of the temple from the Maccabean revolt that threw off the forerunner of Antichrist, or the type of Antichrist. And he's called the little horn. And I went through all of that. Let's do it one more time. He starts out looking at Alexander the Great. And then he goes to, we're looking at 4 heads, 4 generals. Oh, wait a minute, we're only looking at 2 generals. Oh, wait a minute, I'm only looking at 1 general. Seleucus, the king of the north. And he looks a little bit closer and he sees the king of Syria. Keep in mind that Antichrist in Micah is called the Assyrian. And here's Daniel looking at just Seleucus Empire, just that king of Assyria, describing him as the little horn. And Daniel then later says, the Antichrist is called the little horn. We have a definitive type, forerunner, of one being precisely Antichrist's forerunner and one being Antichrist. And where do they come from? Syria. Out of the Seleucus Empire. If you go to that next slide, Scott. You say, Tim, what's all that about? This should say Revelation 13:3, but it's the first mistake I've ever made on a slide. So forget the Daniel 7:6, and in your mind put Revelation 13:3. I believe Nancy made this slide up. The more I think about it. All right, so we're in Revelation 3. I'll talk to her a little bit later about that. He says, now listen, are you with me? I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. This is Revelation. Now the beast which I saw was like a what? A leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, Persia, and the mouth like the mouth of a lion, Babylon. This is in Revelation 13 describing the coming future Antichrist empire. It's like a leopard. It's in Persia. It's in Babylon. It's in Greece. So look at that. Daniel 7 describes the empire as a leopard with 4 wings. What's Revelation describe? The beast, the 10-king, 7-headed beast. He describes it as a leopard beast. You can go to that next one. And why does he do that? Because look at those 2 maps. The top map is the geographical territory of the Seleucid Empire, where the little Antichrist, the forerunner, was. And it is the exact overlay of Revelation when it describes the same leopard idea and the same leopard concept, but this time a 10-king caliphate. Do you see why I get a little nervous when a guy says the Antichrist is going to come out of France? When these books are all written, that I've really had some fun with with people writing me about the book a little bit who don't quite like the paradigm a little bit, you know. It's really amazing. Go to that next one, Scott. Lastly, we said that Micah chapter 5 and 2 says that Antichrist will come from Assyria. So we also have Antichrist, we're told, comes from Assyria. Now that's the same area as ancient Syria. One more. Now, as if that wasn't enough kind of a backdrop to the Middle East roots, here's Netanyahu explaining the exact trouble spot of the same thing that's in Daniel chapter 7. The Seleucid Empire, the former Seleucid Empire, which is now going to overlay the area of the coming Empire of Antichrist. He's explaining how dumb the American administration is up there. No, I'm just sort of kidding you now. Relax, everyone. And he's saying, you know, if they make a deal about that Iranian nuclear thing, we're going to have to do something about it. The very location that's on the map today. Hey, folks, if it hadn't have been for the Arab Spring, which emptied Syria, and Obama pulling our troops too fast out of Iraq, which left a massive vacuum, all of that is setting the stage for the coming Empire of Antichrist in the very area that I just explained, the roots of the Middle Eastern roots of the coming Empire of Antichrist.